go a different direction
Sure.
real quick. One thing we haven't talked about is one of the most famous chronograph movements ever is the Valjoux 72.
Okay.
And it's something that, you know, obviously it's no longer in production. I think the last production watch that I've seen it in was the Panerai, what model is it?
We've actually got some variants on the Valjoux 72. I want to say the 163 has a version of it,
which is an unbelievably well finished movement. But the Val 72 it became the 72 when it got shrunk down from the 23. And the Val 72 it's a very difficult movement to service now because of a parts issue. There are no parts. It's a manual wind chronograph. It's what was used in the original Rolex Daytonas. A lot of manufacturers used them. Longines used the watch. Pretty much everybody across the board used the Valjoux 72 at some point. JLC used it. Everybody used it. The way you can tell a Valjoux 72, if you look at it, is the orientation of the pushers. And you see the pushers, they're called asymmetrical pushers. Where are we at? And if you see the pushers, they're not evenly spaced. That tells you have, in all likelihood, a Valjoux 72 inside of it. It's a manual wind, very easy to break the mainspring, very easy to break the ratchet wheel. The movement's not perfect, but it's still a fabulous, fabulous movement.
And it's important that Mike notes that. Easy to break the ratchet wheel because perhaps the most specialized version of the Valjoux 72 would be the Rolex Caliber 727, a very highly evolved, higher beat rate, free-sprung, Breguet over coil version of the V72. And a lot of times on a vintage Daytona, the first thing people do when they find an old one in a drawer, they start winding it.
They wind it all the way up, and before they know it, and the ratchet wheel usually goes before the mainspring goes. And the ratchet wheel sits on top of the barrel, and it actually holds the power. It engages with the click. When you're actually winding the watch, you hear that little ratcheting noise. Now when you're going backwards, when you're going forwards, and that's the mainspring winding up to hold, and the ratchet wheel holds the power. And on that watch, because there's no decoupler or anything between your stem and your sliding pinion, and the way everything works, your winding pinion, it'll just shear it right off. It just shears teeth right off. They are manufacturing them now. They're manufacturing replacements, which we use when we do service, because almost inevitably, anytime I tear one down, there's at least one tooth damaged on a winding pinion.
But I remember when you could buy a Benrus powered by a Valjoux 72 for under $1,000, and that in like the last 10 years. And now, if you were to find a authentic Rolex 727 chronograph bridge, you could pay thousands of dollars just for that part. So the V72, if you've got one, take good care of it, because whether it's the Rolex variant or not, prices for every V72 watch are going up, and parts, as Mike mentioned, are not just hard to come by, but expensive if you do.
They're very expensive. You could find them, but they are very expensive, and that's one of the reasons service is so expensive. You know, people ask, why is my watch, why is it going to cost so much to fix? A lot of times it's the parts. We don't do a markup on the parts. But it's finding the parts, sourcing the parts, getting them a reliable part supply. The Val 72 has none. There's no part stream reliable across the board.
And I want to say, we briefly mentioned a Panerai that has a vintage Valjoux caliber. The Panerai 163, I believe, has a Valjoux 234, which is kind of a bigger, high beat version, evolved version of the 72 with a date. So great movements, but again, take care of them, treasure them, because they are sort of like living relics in this. It's almost like a coelacanth. It's like a living fossil, only on your wrist. So we've got questions coming in. A question from Eric Würzberger is asking, the current Rolex Milgauss with the 3131, how many years can it go between servicing? Mike, this is contentious because there's a lot of rumors floating around about Rolex service intervals from the factory as of this year.
Rolex, now we talked about this I think last week or the week before. They came up with a lot of improvements in the 4130. And some of the improvements they have to do with the vertical clutch, they have to do with the chronograph wheel. I'm not certain about how many other parts they change along the way. I'm not even certain if when you turn your 4130 in for service, if they're going to automatically upgrade to the new parts or give it as an option as an upgrade.
Now, one of the legacy calibers, though, just the Milgauss 3130.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, I mean, I think this comes down, what Eric is asking really is the 10-year service interval that's been mooted all over the internet credible?
I find it hard to believe 10 years on anything, just because, again, I always go back to the lubricants we use and the lack of volume of lubricants we used. We'll have to do a show one time about it, and just to actually demonstrate the small amounts. If we go back to our vertical clutch, just to kind of give you an idea, see if I can get in here.
Oh, let me grab that guy.
Okay. If you look at the pinions on this, and this just to give you an idea what else is going on inside the watch, the pinions are the little dot you see on the top here. Not on the flat wheel, but actually on the top and bottom. And that's what rides, that's what all the stress is on, and that's where the lubricants go. This actually rides on ruby jewels. Actually, it's a bronze bearing on one side and the ruby on the other side. And it actually, the lubricants are so light, they're still going to dry out. And until they can, devise a lubricant that's not going to dry out, I find it hard to see a 10-year service interval.
Yeah, guys, even
and the other reason too is the gaskets, the case gaskets.
Yeah, even with synthetic lubricants, which extend service life, even with the marginal improvement over a display case back, Rolex still uses solid. UV rays can degrade lubricants. Even with both of those factors and Rolex's undoubted precision in machining pinions and pivots, the bottom line is that no one from the Rolex empire, no authorized dealer, no one in any position of responsibility for fielding a negative outcome has endorsed a 10-year service life. The 5-year warranty is real. The 10-year service life is a rumor. So let's say...
I always say, people ask me, once a watch is serviced with the lubricants we're using now, which are fully synthetic, they're not a blend anymore, 5 to 7 years on a fully serviced movement, and that's if the watchmaker, which we always do, there's a handful of parts that you're always going to want to change. On a 7750, there's a handful of parts in there. Your ratchet drive wheel, different parts inside this for the automatic because it's a weak point. Calendar wheels, stuff like that. There's stuff that just because that watch is 7 years old or 5 years old and we're doing a service on it now, that doesn't mean in another 5 years when those parts are 10 years old that it's still going to be functioning the way it did when we're servicing it now. So that's why we change some of the parts at a routine service, just to kind of bring it back to zero life, or as close to zero life as we can.